Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Eric Jenkins. I'm the account manager for Connecting Up in TechSuite New Zealand, and I would like to welcome you to the webinar, Which Cloud Accounting Software, which will be presented by Mick Devine from Calxa. We'll start with just a little bit of housekeeping here. All the lines are going to be muted, so if you've got any questions during the session, just type it in the questions box. I'll be able to see those, and we'll be able to relay that through to Mick during the webinar so that he can answer those for you. Please note that your comments and questions will not be appearing to the entire group. They will just be appearing to me. If you've got any technical issues, again, just type those in the questions box and I'll do your best to try and help, or do my best rather, to try and help you troubleshoot it. Although do note that if you're on a Wi-Fi connection and do have multiple programs open, this can sometimes affect the quality of the audio and video. So if possible, just close those down and that'll help you have the best experience you can today. Before we start, I'd also like to remind you that this webinar is being recorded and you will get a link to the webinar and the slides within the week after we finish up today, and you'll be able to access it at any time then. Otherwise, that's about it for me. So Mick, over to you now.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Good morning, everybody. And let's see if I can help you with something useful here. So what I want to do today is give you some general guidance on choosing cloud accounting system, and then look at some of the more popular systems out there and talk about some of the pros and cons of each of them, specifically as they relate to not-for-profit organizations. Some of these systems work very well for particular types of business, but what I'm going to do today is really focus on where they work well, where they work not so well for not-for-profits. So let's have a look and firstly think about why cloud accounting is important at all. You know, why not just stick to the desktop software that you've had for the last 20 years? And there's a few benefits to having your accounting in the cloud. And I'm taking a fairly broad definition of cloud here, and I'm defining that as having the data stored online. So I am including MYOB's account right, which some purists would say is not true cloud because it's not accessed through the browser, and you do need to install software. But for practical purposes, I think that's, I mean, it comes as part of the pros and cons, but I think it's otherwise pedantic, and most of the benefits still apply even there. And the first one's just access to your data and access to your system. Being able to access that data from anywhere or almost anywhere is a huge benefit. So if you've got a treasurer that's off-site, they can access the system. If you've got auditors, they can access the system without coming into your office. Staff that are working off-site can access the system. That whole process becomes a lot easier. You don't have to copy files backwards and forwards as we used to do in the old days. And closely linked to that is collaboration. You can involve more people, you can get help from people easier, you can give people access to just parts of the system and disperse the responsibility for it as well. And then the security. I know some people do get concerned about hacking of their data, and I don't think we should ever be complacent about that. But in most cases, the online accounting systems have good protocols there, especially when you combine good passwords with two-factor authentication. So you have a code that you get on your phone or through an app on your phone, so that it makes it really hard for somebody else to impersonate you and log in. But where cloud security surpasses the security of locally stored data is in that disaster situation. You know, nobody's going to break into your office and steal your accounting data when it's in the cloud. If your office burns down, you're not going to lose your accounting data because it's stored online. My office is in Townsville, and I'm sitting in a hotel in Brisbane, and I can access my accounting data from here and all my systems from here. So there are some security benefits, but one of the big benefits of cloud accounting, and one of the things that I think has really changed the accounting space in the last few years, is the automation of data entry. Bank feeds are a key part of that. So bringing in transaction data from your bank and then automatically coding that so that if you get, your rent expense that comes in every month gets paid by direct debit, bank feed brings it in, automatically codes it to rent. It's eliminating a lot of that manual data entry that we used to do. There's other apps like Expensify, Receipt Bank, HubDoc that scan documents and feed them into the accounting system, and in many cases attach them to actual transactions, so that they not only save you the data entry, but they also do the filing side of that as well. So, and then on the payroll side, there's single touch payroll for reporting to the government. That requires an internet connection. If I'm good, I'll know what they call that in. It's payday filing in New Zealand, isn't it? I have done my homework, but these are things that need online accounting systems to work well. And then there's all the optional add-ons that you can attach to your cloud accounting system in ways that are so much easier than in the world of desktop accounting. And this is something I know about because I did MYOB's first add-on program back in 2000, and I know how much easier that whole process is when everything's online. And the range of specialist applications for client management, for payroll, for rostering, in many cases can prevent you or at least delay the need to move away from your current accounting system to an expensive ERP system. And often that way you get the best of breed systems. You get the best payroll system, the best client management system, rather than the compromises that are often involved in an ERP system that's trying to do everything for everybody. And the best of those add-on products will automate the data entry. They'll feed information directly into the accounting system, and they should do that programmatically. It should be either scheduled or it should be press of a button transfer of data. It shouldn't be export a text file, import it into the accounting system. That's the way we used to do things in the 80s and 90s. We shouldn't have to do things that way anymore. And again, better reporting is part of that. It's about using that information that you have in the accounting system to get the best management information for your organization. And I'm going to talk shortly about the differences between the main products, the MYOB, the QuickBooks Xero. But while I do that, just remember that the basics are there for all of them. They do debits and credits. You can pay your suppliers. You can receive money from your customers. They all do payroll in some way. So any of them will work. It's a matter of finding out which one is going to work best for you. And they're all robust these days. I mean, I remember back in the early 90s, I went to work for an organization that had just paid $45,000 for a point of sale system that also did accounting, and I ran a trial balance report and it didn't balance, and I phoned the suppliers and they said trial balances all over the world don't balance. That's what accountants do, they make them balance. And I nearly fell off my chair. But in the world of computerized accounting, a trial balance should always balance, and you don't need to be concerned about some of that basic stuff these days. So before we look at the individual software, let's stop a minute and talk about the process, because I think the key thing to do first is to be clear on what your needs are. What are the requirements of your organization? Because we are all slightly different. You know, we have our different complexities, our different processes, and while any of these applications will do the basics, if they don't do that one thing that makes a big difference to your organization, you're going to have a hard life for the next year, 2 years, 3 years, or whatever, until you decide to change accounting systems again. Because changing accounting systems, it's not a trivial task. It's something that takes time, effort, energy. So it's worth spending a bit of time doing that proper requirements analysis first and looking at what you need. And one of the key ones in the not-for-profit sector is looking at how your programs are structured. You know, if you've been using it, the old MYOB, you know, how your jobs are structured, how important's that structure, how many of them do you have, and how do you need to organize them, what reporting do you need from them, that sort of thing. What do you need in terms of payroll? You know, how big's your payroll? But probably more importantly, how complex is your payroll? You know, if you've got 500 full-time staff who are all paid a salary that's the same every month, your payroll's a lot easier to manage than if you've got 50 staff who are a mixture of casuals, part-timers, full-timers, and every hour of their day needs to get allocated to a job. You know, can the new system handle that complexity, and what sort of complexity does it need? And keep in mind that, you know, sometimes it's a matter of, okay, I like everything else about the accounting system except for payroll, and it may make sense to move the payroll outside of accounting and use a standalone payroll app that then feeds information into the accounting system. So there's different ways of doing it, but you can't make those choices unless you really understand what your requirements are to start with. And then they do all cost different amounts, and they charge differently, sometimes per user. So, you know, mostly per file in some ways, but some of them charge per user as well. Some you can do more within the file. They have different levels, but at the end of the day, the actual cost of the software is probably the least important part of the requirements. If you save $20 a month and get something that doesn't work properly for you, you'll lose more than $20 a month just in the time and frustration of having made that wrong choice. So yes, you need to be careful with the budget, but get the system that's right for you first. And make sure that, especially if it's a system that's quite different to the previous one that you've used, get some training, get some support. get it set up right, and then go from there and make an informed choice about what you're doing. Now, this is a diagram we put together a couple of years back about the whole ecosystem around the accounting software, and it's got MYOB and Calcsa in the middle there, but that doesn't matter. It could be any accounting system, it could be any reporting system, but the key thing is that on the left hand side you've got these other systems, and in principle it doesn't matter whether they're manual paper-based systems or they're electronic apps, but you have something that looks after clients, that records client information, a CRM system, client management system, whatever, something that manages rostering, payroll, that sort of thing, and then the workforce HR management side of things. And all of these are the inputs into the accounting system. And then at the other end, you've got the outputs. It's the reporting to program managers, to department managers, to the board, to the CEO, and giving people the information that they need to make decisions in the organization. And when you're choosing an accounting system, make sure that that stuff on the left-hand side will still happen and work smoothly with your new accounting system. And then make sure that stuff on the right-hand side, that everybody gets the reports they need, the information they need out of it. You know, the accountant who's doing the BAS and the end of month statutory, end of year statutory reporting, the AIS statement, that sort of thing. The accounting system's designed to do that, but is it going to give you the right management information as well? So those are the things to think about, and look at the system as a whole, look at your organization as a whole when you're thinking about the accounting system, because it is a key part of where the information flows in your organization. Before I move on to the individual software applications, have you got any questions there, Eric, or should I just keep on?
No questions at the moment, Mick. Feel free to keep on going for now.
Okay, all right. Let's start with MYOB account right. Some of the good things about MYOB is it's a very easy upgrade for anybody that's used the old desktop classic MYOB Premier 19, that range of software. It's a simple upgrade process. It takes all the details that are in your current file, including transaction history and everything, and just moves it online. In terms of ease of use, if you're familiar with the old Premier 19 range, you'll find your way around Account Right Live easily as well. You know, it's the same basic navigation. Yes, some of the screens are slightly different. They, you know, there's an extra button here and there, something, you know, there's a few more sorting and filtering features you can do on some of the screens, but the core functionality you'll find very easy to use. It's got that same hierarchy of jobs, so you can have header jobs, you can have detailed jobs, etc. Searching for stuff, audit, I think is one of the best out there. It's very easy to find transactions in MYOB. There's half a dozen different ways that you can find them, and they'll all take you there in the end. So, and reasonably quickly as well. And then bank feeds. MYOB a couple of years ago purchased an organization called BankLink out of New Zealand, who've been doing bank feeds for 20 years or so. And they have direct relationships with most of the banks in Australia and New Zealand, and direct bank feeds from those banks. And that's important. There's two ways of doing bank feeds. One is that direct relationship with the bank where you authorize the bank to provide your information, and then MYOB or whoever it is pulls it into your accounting software. That's the gold standard. It gives you accuracy, it gives you security as well. The other method is what's known as screen scraping, where you hand over your username and password to your accounting software, and their systems then effectively log on to your internet banking as though you were logging onto it. They read the screen, interpret the details that are on there as well as they can, and then feed it into the software. It's firstly less accurate because it can get interrupted by any sort of different pop-up screens and whatever the banking software shows. You tend to get more duplicate transactions, you tend to get more missed transactions. But I think what's, for me, the big problem with those screen scraping bank feeds is the security side of it. You're handing over your password to your banking to a third party. And if you read the fine print on your online banking, it says you shouldn't do that. If you read the fine print when you hand over that information to the accounting software, it says if there's any problems, they don't accept any liability for them. So that means if some programmer in the accounting software managed to figure out how to get hold of your bank password and username and did something disreputable with it, they wouldn't take responsibility, the bank wouldn't take responsibility, your problem. So now I suspect if it came to that, the accounting software companies wouldn't like the publicity and would do something, but that's their public stance and that's the bank's public stance, and for me that's too much of a risk to take. So I don't deal with any of the ones that do, or I don't use the bank feeds for those bank accounts. I only deal with direct bank feeds because I like the security of my bank. I want to know I don't have very much money in there, but what's in there I want to protect. So, and we'll talk about that a bit more when we look at the other accounting software shortly. But MYOB have the best bank feeds out of all of them. That's one of the things I think that they've done really well. And final point there, if you're looking for finance staff with MYOB experience, they're all over the place. They're easy to find. You look on Seek for bookkeepers, finance people. There's lots of people out there with MYOB experience because it's been around for so long. So some of the downsides, you do still need to install MYOB Account Right. So while your data's in the cloud, you can access it from anywhere where you've got the Account Right application installed. So I've got one of those files and I can access it from here in Brisbane because I've got my laptop here and I've got the Account Right software installed on it. I couldn't go into an internet cafe and use it. If I was one of those people who loves Macs, I couldn't use it on a Mac. But having said that, I can still access that data if I've got the software installed. So that's something to consider, and it's a deal breaker for some people, but not for others. Payroll gets clunky once you get more than 100 employees, and the more complex, the more clunky it gets. If you've got something that feeds data in through the timesheet system, you can cope with a lot more, but just be aware that the more people in your payroll, the harder that gets. But if you've got a small payroll, 20, 50, 100 people, works fine, does everything you need to do. Probably one of the things the payroll doesn't have that QuickBooks has, for example, is an employee portal. I think that has to come someday because people expect that. And those of you who need to deal with multi-currency transactions, that's currently a work in progress with MYOB. You can do what can you do? You can do purchases now in foreign currencies, but you can't do invoices and sales in foreign currency. Now that's supposed to be coming in the next few months. This time I think they probably have to. I mean, it's been coming in the next 12 months for about 5 years now. But since they've stopped support for the MYOB Classic desktop program, I think it has to happen soon. And as I said, it is there on the expenses side now, so it shouldn't be too far away. MYOB Essentials. Now, this is probably the minor one in terms of not-for-profit organizations. It is browser-based, and because it's an MYOB product, it does have those good quality bank feeds. But it's their simple application. It doesn't have any jobs, so you can't do any cost center or program reporting. It has got payroll, but it's fairly simple payroll. It does do the single touch payroll or what's it, payday lodgements or whatever they're called in New Zealand. Sorry, can't remember. Anyway, it does do them, whatever they are. And also it'll be a little bit harder to find people with the experience. I think it's fine for very small not-for-profit organizations like sporting club, something like that. Worth having a look at to see how it meets your needs there. And both the MYOB products, I'm fairly sure there's still a discount program through TechSoup / Connecting Up. So worth considering for smaller organizations, but not for bigger ones. Then we get to Xero. Xero is fully browser-based, always has been, and it wasn't the first cloud-based accounting system, but I think certainly in terms of Australia and New Zealand, it was the first one to gain any large number of clients. It's been very popular with non-accountants. It's been very popular with accountants too. I think it's been popular with non-accountants because they find it easy to use. It doesn't have that same it hides a lot more of the accounting debits and credits side of things than even MYOB does. It's been popular with accountants, and I'm going to try and avoid I'm going to try and avoid slandering any of my friends in the accounting profession. Sometimes I think that's been based a lot more on the self-interest of the accountants and the commissions and the free practice software that they get from Xero than with the benefits of the software itself. But not always. Sometimes, it does have that accessibility. It does enable the accountant to share data easily, and that's one of the things that attracted accountants to it in the first place. So it's got bank feeds. When they first started out, they were all screen scraped bank feeds, but more and more of them now are direct feeds. Certainly all the major banks, they have direct feeds. So if you're dealing with any of the big banks, they'll have direct feeds for those. If you're dealing with a smaller bank, a credit union, a building society, or somebody, ask and see whether the bank feeds are direct feeds or they use screen scraping. As I said, they're constantly rolling out more, so I wouldn't be able to sit here and give you a list of which ones they do and which ones they don't, but certainly they started with the big ones and moved on from there. It's just like MYOB. It's easy to find staff with experience with Xero these days. There's lots of bookkeepers, lots of finance people who've worked with Xero, so that's not a problem. Their multi-currency support's good, and they have a wide range of apps that work feeding data in. One big thing to be careful of with Xero, tracking categories are their equivalent of jobs in MYOB or classes in QuickBooks. You can have 2 lists, but each list has a limit of 100. So if you've got more than 100, stop and think about what you're doing. I've had more than a handful of our clients in the last couple of years who've switched to Xero on the advice of their accountant, who hasn't done that requirements analysis that I talked about earlier, and then after they've switched, they've realized that they can't do the tracking categories that they want. One organization that comes to mind ideally wanted to have 500 or 600, and in order to accommodate that, they've ended up with 6 different Xero company files, which are their sort of top level departments, and then all the projects run under each of those. And that means that they're switching from one file to another to do different things. It means that their reporting needs consolidating across all of them, and it also they're paying for 6 files instead of 1. So, but once they'd made that commitment to go to Xero, they didn't want to go back on it. And just be aware of that before you start. I've dealt with lots of other organizations that have got, where 20, 30, 50 programs is enough for them. Fine. Xero can work very well in that case. Xero do put physical limits on their payroll, which I think is 200 employees. And they won't actually let you have more than that. And again, their payroll, it gets a bit hard to manage when you get to that sort of number. When you get to the sort of couple of hundred employees, it's probably time to start looking at a specialist payroll package. Some people find the manual data entry process clunky. I think it's improved in the last couple of years. 5 or 6 years ago, it seemed like every transaction required about 3 times as many mouse clicks as the similar transaction in something like MYOB or QuickBooks, for example. But even so, because this so much of Xero is about using other apps to feed data in and using the bank feeds to feed data in, the amount of manual data entry was so significantly reduced, it didn't matter. And, you know, it's one of those things that you get used to. You know, you get used to the process of putting transactions in. So don't see that as a deal breaker. And, you know, what one person finds clunky, another person finds smooth and easy to do. You know, we all come from different backgrounds with different experiences. So that's just one to think of, to keep in mind, and, you know, and try it for yourself and see if you like it, because you're the one who's going to have to work with it. And it can also be hard, especially for new people, to find transactions because they hide the accounting so well, in, you know, with the intention of making things easy to use. It's not always obvious, you know, if you've misallocated something, it's not always obvious where to go to look for it. But again, it's a training thing, it's an experience thing. That's an issue for somebody who's new to Xero. It's not an issue for somebody who's been using it for 12 months and working with it all day, every day. So that's, I think it's a downside, but it's not something to get totally upset about. Now, QuickBooks Online. First, just a quick bit of background for those who either aren't aware or may be confused, because I think there's been quite a bit of confusion about the whole QuickBooks story in the last few years. QuickBooks used to be sold in Australia, the desktop product, by Reckon, and New Zealand as well. And that arrangement ended in 2014, but Reckon was still allowed to use that desktop software as long as they rebranded it. So they rebranded it to Reckon Accounts, and it's essentially the same as the old QuickBooks desktop product. Intuit are the American makers, developers of QuickBooks. They developed the QuickBooks desktop product, and now they've developed the QuickBooks Online product. After the breakup of their relationship with Reckon, they've started selling their online product in Australia under the QuickBooks name. So when people talk about QuickBooks, it's not always immediately clear what they're talking about, because there's plenty of Reckon users that I come across that still refer to it as QuickBooks, because that's what it was when they bought it 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or whatever. If you're looking to move from that Reckon Accounts QuickBooks desktop product to go to something cloud-based, QuickBooks Online is probably the one that's going to be most familiar to you. It's got that same structure of classes, customers, and jobs. The chart of accounts structure is very similar. The terminology is similar. Not all the layout and processes are the same. In fact, some of them are quite different, but you'll get used to that. And it's probably the easiest one to transfer data from Reckon into QuickBooks Online. It's probably a bit more complete and reliable than going to either Xero or MYOB. It is fully browser-based. The classes have hierarchy, so you can have header classes and subclasses under those, similar to the way jobs work in MYOB, whereas in Xero, you just get that flat list of tracking categories with no headers or anything. They use what's essentially a third-party payroll software called KeyPay, but it's very tightly integrated with QuickBooks. You actually operate it from within QuickBooks. You don't actually leave QuickBooks. It's transactions updated immediately, but it's very flexible, very powerful payroll system. It has an employee portal, so you can go in there and put leave requests in. You can retrieve previous pay slips and all that sort of thing. So it's very good from that employee perspective on the payroll. It's very good from the processing side of the payroll. It's got multi-currency, and that works pretty well. Now, I mentioned bank feeds earlier. A part of the whole bank feed process is bank rules, and all the software has bank rules. And the idea there is that you create a rule. So you see a transaction, and it's, maybe it's a bank charge or something, and you create a rule that says every time you see one of these come in through the bank feed, automatically code it to the bank fees expense account. And they all do that. MYOB does that, Xero does that, QuickBooks does it. But where QuickBooks goes a step further than that is creating bank rules for you and automatically suggesting that, for example, it sees a transaction from Caltex. They use machine learning technology, and they look at how everybody else has processed Caltex transactions, and most people put it to fuel expense. So they'll suggest, should this go to fuel expense? So there's some more intelligence to their bank rules, and I quite like the way that works, the way it's going, and I think that's the future. It's again making life easier for you. You still get to confirm it, so you can't, it's hard to make mistakes, but automation's good. Now, a couple of the things I don't like about QuickBooks Online. Firstly, they have fewer direct bank feeds. I use QuickBooks Online for one of my company files, and it was only last October when they had Commonwealth Bank direct connections. There was a couple of the other major banks they had before then, and even then, I think it took us about 3 months to get the credit card transactions connected up. So there are a very small number of banks where they do direct feeds. Other than that, they're screen scrape ones. So tread carefully there, ask the right questions, ask if they've got direct bank feeds for your bank. I find it hard to find transactions, but again, like I said with Xero, that's something that somebody who's new and not in there all day every day is going to experience. So whereas I have a phone a friend system with QuickBooks, and I have some good friends around the country that help me when I get stuck and I can't find things, and they point me in the right direction. So people who use it all day every day, they learn to find their way around it. They yes, some things aren't obvious, but get the right training and you'll overcome that. And then in terms of finding staff, there's not so many people out there with QuickBooks experience as there is with Xero or MYOB experience. I think that will change over time. Intuit have got deep pockets. They're biggest accounting software company in the world, and I'm sure they're in Australia and New Zealand because they want to grow. So it will become more widespread, and you know, it's not rocket science. It's accounting software. If you've used MYOB, used Xero, you'll learn how to use QuickBooks, and vice versa. It's, you know, they all do the same things at the end of the day. It's just how they do them and the little nuances that go into that. So my final steps: firstly, make sure you define your requirements and consider all your users in the organization. Who needs to feed data in? Who needs to get data out the other end? And make sure that whatever system you introduce is going to satisfy all those needs. And there's free trials with all these applications. Try it for a month, put some transactions in, look for things, look at the reports, see how it feels. And you know, sometimes that makes a big difference. And then don't be afraid to spend some money on getting some advice, getting some assistance to help you set it up. You know, and I think there's a couple of aspects to that. One is get some advice on somebody who's familiar with 2 or more of these systems so they can help you make the right choice between them. Or once you've decided on one, get some advice and assistance to get it set up right, get you trained properly, get your staff trained properly, so that you have the most efficient transition process, because it will be a pain in the neck to transition from one system to the other. It's not a trivial task. I mean, some are easier than others, and probably the simplest of the lot is the MYOB Premier 19 to MYOB Account Right. Yeah, you can do that in half an hour, and because the systems are, you know, very similar, you can probably do that without training. But anything where you're going to make a change of system, make sure you get some training, make sure you learn how to use this system, and be prepared for ongoing learning as well, because they're all changing regularly. You know, they're adding new features, they're improving, they're doing things better. So learn, enjoy. You know, there's a lot of good information out there, and yeah, ultimately they should make your life easier. Eric, you got any questions for me?
I do, in fact, have a question here from Frank, who's asked if you could please comment on which of the cloud-based software does inventory integrated to the general ledger well. They've apparently tried it with Xero, but it's too basic and it doesn't have a proper stock take function for them.
Yeah, Xero is probably the weakest of them, apart from MYOB Essentials, which doesn't have inventory at all. I would, so the two to look at closely are MYOB Account Right and QuickBooks Online. I'm not an expert on inventory, and I haven't done anything in inventory with either of those for quite a while. But my gut feel is that QuickBooks Online is probably the one that's going to be better than Account Right. But those are the two to have a look at.
All right, thanks for that, Mick. Now, we have apparently got a couple of questions coming through here from Ale. The first questions come through as, how would you mitigate the risk of a cloud accounting provider suddenly disappearing?
Okay. I think With the size of these organizations we're talking about here, it's highly unlikely that Xero, MYOB, or QuickBooks will suddenly disappear. But having said that, you know, nothing's impossible in this world. And so in terms of backup options that are independent, probably the best one there is MYOB's AccountWrite, because they do store their data in a separate database so that you can create a backup of it locally on your computer, and you can even restore that backup locally to your computer. That's the issue, the solution there. Both Xero and QuickBooks, their only recommendation if you want to back up data is to export copious amounts of it to text files, CSV files that you can then open up in Excel. I find that fairly unsatisfactory as a backup. You know, what are you going to do with that information afterwards? You could, there are, for Xero at least, I have seen one app that automates that. I can't remember off the top of my head what it's called. So it does automate that process of extracting all the transactional data to a spreadsheet. But again, what are you going to do with that afterwards? I think in terms of audit, you're probably better off just saving copies of month-end reports. I don't know that I'd go to the transaction level. As I said, I think if one of these suppliers went bankrupt, for example, one of the others would be, or well, the two others plus Sage from the UK would probably be fighting amongst themselves to pick up the remnants and maintain the systems afterwards, even if it was only temporary, so they until they transfer you to their own system. But I think total destruction, disappearance, I think is highly unlikely. I hope that answers that one as best as I can.
Now, yes, no, that was good, I think. Now, we've had 4 more questions actually come through from AL while you were talking, which was the rest of it. I might actually start just with the last question here, just because I think this one will be quickest, and then we'll hop into the other 3 and see how you're going. But AL's just asked, finally, he wasn't sure if he'd picked up which of the systems allows allocating staff time to specific categories, classes, and jobs. Would you be able to clarify that one?
Yep. MYOB and QuickBooks. Xero's Payroll doesn't have tracking categories on the payroll transactions at this stage. I've heard it's coming, but I've got no idea when.
All right, cool. All right. Excellent, thanks for that. Now I'll hop into his other first 3 questions here, and I will note, Ale, as well, that we can also look at taking this offline, depending on how you're going for time here, Mick. But I'll go through Ale's other 3 questions here, and let me know how you feel. So Ale's asked a few things. So the first question, yep. I'll go through all 3, and then I'll repeat them if necessary. The first question is that he's noted that they process many small transactions through a database, and then import the transactions in bulk through a CSV file, and they're looking at which platform would allow them to do that the best. The second question is around planning and budgeting. So just in terms of planning and budgeting, which of the systems gives the best tools for that? And then finally, and again, I'm not sure, AO, you might need to clarify which software you're currently using, but he's also asked, how about importing data from their current software into a new system? Which one would allow them to do that best as well? So,
okay.
Good to work with there.
Yep, I think there's reasonably easy answers to those. All of them will allow you to import transactions from a CSV file. I think there's MWeb Essentials is the one that I struggled with most on that, and actually imported it as a bank feed rather because they don't have a transaction import. But Xero, QuickBooks, and MWeb Account Write, it's reasonably easy to import stuff from a CSV file. In terms of budgeting, none of them are very good. They all have some basic budgeting. This is where I have to do some self-promotion. If you really want to do good budgeting, look at Calxa. There is a donation program through Connecting Up and TechSoup. That's the solution to budgeting, regardless of whether you're using MYOB, QuickBooks, or Xero. And then importing your current software.
Hale has clarified he's using Reckon currently, if that helps. Sorry for interrupting. Yep.
You're using Reckon. MYOB have a conversion process that they do in-house themselves, I believe. Xero, there's a couple of third parties. JetConvert is one that comes to mind that will convert your Reckon data into Xero. And there is a process with QuickBooks Online. I'm not sure if it's through a third party or not, but there is a process there. And I've been told that it's reasonably easy because because the Reckon systems come from the same sort of background as the QuickBooks system. It's the same similar internal structure. So, Eric, if you want to give me my email address afterwards, I'm happy to just follow up on those and provide some links.
Can do. All right, I think that's just about it for questions here. I might actually just make a couple of comments off the back of a few comments that you've made throughout the webinar, Mick. So I know that you mentioned earlier that MYOB had a discount through Connecting Up and TechSoup, and that definitely is still available. Off memory, I think it's 30%, but basically that's on the cloud subscriptions for their account write, different flavors of that, as well as essentials. So yeah, that one is still available in the program, guys. And then of course, as you've mentioned yourself, Mick, Calxa is also available. So yeah, definitely look into that one, guys. It is quite a good program here. I'll definitely help Mick with the self-promotion there. It's good stuff. Otherwise, I think that just about covers it now. So yeah, thank you very much, Mick, for presenting today. And thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you learned a lot from the presentation and that we were able to get through all your questions. If you did have any questions that come through to mind later or any feedback for the webinar, just send that through to events@connectingup.org. That would be much appreciated. We can also pass along your contact details through to Mick. So again, just send those through to events@connectingup.org and we can make sure that we make that connection there. Don't forget, again, there will be a recording available on the slides too. Should be within the next week or so when we can get that up on the site, and you should be getting a link sent to you around there as well. So that should be all good. Otherwise, yeah, thanks for being with us. Mick, have you got anything else to say here?
No, just thanks everybody for giving up your time this morning, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you very much, everyone, for coming along. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks again.